It's all in your hands. Unlock your potential with your dream being
Welcome,
strength.
everyone, to the My Thursday of this week. If this is your first time joining, My Thursday is sponsored by MyT.coach, MyT.coach, right? And we've been doing this for uh, over 5 years as a platform. And we have a lot of coaches that participate with us. They either do webinars, they do workshops, they do one-on-one coaching. So we have a lot of access to coaches that focus on different needs. And tonight's coach is one that is an expert in quite a few areas that are related together. And I'll let him talk about that when I turn the floor over. And you might be wondering, who's this guy in the black hat? Well, I'm Marc Nadel, and I am one of the founders of MyT.coach. I've been a Fortune 500 executive for four different companies. Two of them were actually Fortune 100. They were huge. Two of the companies are based in the US. One was headquartered in Europe, and one was headquartered in Asia. So I have a lot of experience in tech, and I started as an individual contributor, working in the office in marketing, doing product planning, product development, and at the midpoint, I transitioned over to more senior leadership, director, VP, and above, right? And it's in that process that I learned how to coach people. I'm more of a mentoring coach. I listen to people, I talk to them, they bring me their issues, their situations. And, I either work them through challenging situations or I will coach them on certain skills that I'm comfortable coaching in, right? Now, uh, tonight we're talking about assertiveness. And if you're joining us and you're joining us from the flyer you saw, then it's about the awareness and understanding better what assertiveness is, where it can be applied, and like how broad it really is. When somebody asked me on a panel about a year ago, what are the superpowers that you should
Mhm,
have, right? The things that really count as fundamental differentiators. I said, the three I would pick is like curiosity, assertiveness, and communications. And if you have
mhm,
those three as a leader,
mhm,
you are
mhm,
going to shine.
mhm,
And actually, if you're going to be a doer, if you're going to be someone collaborating, also, that's also superpower for you. Almost
mhm,
anything else is more narrow, more focused, maybe more role specific, but those three are universal and really effective because they all touch on people and they all touch on growing. Like curiosity is very important. Now, my journey in assertiveness is probably going to be the opposite of what
mhm,
most of you are interested in learning how to become assertive, right? Most people explore assertiveness when they feel they haven't had enough presence or authority, or they haven't gotten their way so many times when they were the one with the right answer or working on the best project. And they're looking to
mhm.
become more, in their minds, they're thinking of becoming more aggressive. So if you look at this thing here, I guess it's the one over here. This is a
No, there
little
you go.
diagram that I've used to explain the difference for me. This is just my
Mhm,
personal interpretation, right? Because over here, you have the passive people who either perceive or they're perceived as lesser than. They don't feel they have the rights or the entitlements. And then as you go to this one over here, this is the assertive. These are the people who feel they're greater than or are perceived as greater than. Like they have the authority, they're the
mhm,
executives in the room
mhm,
full of, middle
mhm,
managers or individual
mhm,
contributors. And then up here on the top, right, you see
mhm,
this equal sign. And that is really the goal of the assertive person in my mindset. It's you're trying to establish equality, whether you're on the lower end of the hierarchy or the upper end, or you're not
mhm,
the expert, or you're the customer, or you're the expert. Your goal here is to make everyone feel respected, equal in
mhm,
respect, and then to
mhm,
use the skills to get
mhm,
what you need out of the engagement. And Joe is
mhm,
going to go through a whole host of these different scenarios, and we're going to have a discussion about that. Now, my journey,
mhm,
I started all the way over here. I was super aggressive. People were afraid of me at my level because I would come in and I would just bulldoze people. And I would spend hours just being an expert in what it is we're talking about. And I would always get my way. And even though it got me promoted at least once a year for the first 10 years of my career,
Mhm.
I found, my mentor pointed out that I would always be an individual contributor if I had this approach with people, right?
Mhm.
If I was this hyper aggressive person that always got his way, you were just going to leave bodies behind you and nobody would want to work with you twice, right? So that's when I'm a curious guy. So I said, I want to change. I want to be an executive. I don't want to be this super specialized, individual contributor forever. So you can see how that's maybe different than what a lot of you are dealing with. And so the reason why I bring this up is because assertiveness is a very, very broad topic. It involves
Mhm.
every single time people are connecting and working together, assertiveness is the opportunity to get more out of the engagement, and
Mhm.
we can always grow, right? So now I
Mhm.
want to introduce one of my favorite coaches on the MyT.coach platform,
Oh,
Dr.
thank you.
Joseph Rios. He's a Stanford PhD, and he's also a Google. He worked at Google for many years, both as a coach and as an expert working on AI and related to language learning. So
Yep.
I don't want to mangle too much of what he does, but
Yep.
he's offered many different workshops, on our platform that have been very well received. He gets a lot of praise from the people who've worked with him. He does one-on-one coaching as well. So now let me turn the floor over to you, Joe, on this.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mark. And it's great, as always, to be here. I think, well, just a little bit more about me. I've always been interested in language as
Mhm.
a tool for communication. And from very little, and I mean very young, I began studying languages, and that carried on until I moved overseas. I went to college in a few different countries, and but it was always with the intent of really learning language at a mechanical level, and always comparing it to my language. But that just opened the door to this other thing we broadly call culture and all of that access to different people around the world that you get when you speak another language. And that caused a big shift in my view of the world and of life. I started to realize that my sphere as an American was just one vector on the whole experience of life. There's so many ways it's experienced in different languages and places around the world. So one thing led to the next. I ended up studying the anthropology of communication at Stanford and became what we call an ethnographer. It's more participant observation in my research. I started looking at problems. I mean, it's social science probably in the extreme. We kind of take an N of one situation and we kind of participant observe it. It's very much the antithesis of basic science, which takes large data sets. This is really, I worked on projects for a year or 2 years as the person in the activity, studying from the inside out. So I'm a real inductive thinker. And I think that's what I bring to coaching. That's what I bring to teaching. I started doing from there, I started working in public education very early on because I had a dream to really reinvent in Northern California how Silicon Valley basically looked at learning for immigrants. That is to say, the learning process of acquiring across the curriculum, whether it was mathematics or right or language arts, whatever, but taking into account their needs. So devised a whole system for one big school district that became sort of the standard for that county I was in.
Mm.
But from there, then I was offered, it was right at was it the dot-com boom there, Mark? Intel came to me and they come to one of my presentations for the school. I think it was one of the parents, in fact, in the audience. And she said, "We need you." And they yanked me. I went on to work for Intel after that on a
Mm.
global English language development project where we set the standards for all their fabs worldwide. I did the ethnographies, I did the research, and then with a lot of designers, learning and development people, we designed a curriculum certification process. We set that in place in 8 countries. And that's kind of when I started corporate. Then I started training. I started getting hired by folks who said, Joe, we need people who can really think like you do. We'll give you off-the-shelf tools, training materials and stuff. So I started teaching everything. But mostly I got yanked into like leadership training, but on the global scale. And specifically, and I'll wrap it up here, the cross-cultural side. And that's where I kind of want to finish, is that I ended up living in China for a number of years, in Asia for many years. And I think China became this mystery place for me, a
Mm,
fascinating black box where I just couldn't figure things out. And so to today, it's been a focus of interest for me to study the language, to study the dissonance that I see sometimes between cultures, the consonants. There's much more in common than we think. We're humans. So it's become kind of the mainstay of my work now, as Mark knows. I work mostly with Chinese clients worldwide right now. And so I bring that to bear. And then the topic of assertiveness is particularly dear to me because I see
mm,
how much Chinese can struggle with it.
mm,
It's not just shy people, and it's not just Chinese, by the way. It's anyone, Americans, you know this, Mark, because
mhm,
there's the two dimensions. There's the personal, and then there's the workplace. And I would argue the personal is even harder, much harder, because it opens up all the emotional. Workplace, at least you can contain that emotional stuff. But assertiveness, as Mark said, is probably there are a few superpowers, but it's the thing that it's this thing, and it's very hard to say what it really is, as Mark said, but it's the spectrum of behavior that if you really learn it inside out and you use it in your everyday life, whether personally or at work, in the proper way, we'll go over this today. You have this ability. I call it a very simple thing. The metric I use, Mark, is you can go to bed at night, hit the pillow, and feel really good. Why? Because you said what you needed to say, you said it in a polite way, and you're known as a person who's straight and confident. You got nothing
mm,
to worry about. But how many of my students, my clients, go home at night and they say, God, I should have said something, right? I felt so badly because I didn't speak up, or that person just stepped all over me. And they carry this with them for months,
mm.
not longer. So that's why I really like this topic and I spend a lot of time on it. This course is very dear to me, the one I teach around it, by the way. So
I'm
yeah,
going to venture to say that some of our worst experiences that we carry for long periods of time is when we got stepped on because we were
yep,
not assertive or we hesitated and someone else grabbed our opportunity, right?
you got it. Yep, you got it in life and in work.
Yep.
Happens all over the place. So good. So that's
Also,
my
if I could say one more little comment is
yeah,
compared to so many other skills, assertiveness is the most unnatural,
yeah, right.
right?
Good point.
It is the most unnatural, and that is why it is so difficult to acquire that
Mhm.
skill on your own, right?
Mhm.
Like leadership, you can read books about it. You can practice
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
Communications, also, you can
Mhm.
watch YouTube videos and get some
Right.
ideas and learn things. But
Right.
assertiveness, it's like learning how to play tennis. It's a lot like that. If you don't have someone who knows how to play, who's teaching you how to serve, how to hit a forehand, strategies, tactics, whatever, you'll never be any good.
Mhm.
So
Right. And
that's
Mark,
why, yeah.
yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, yeah. So like most people, when the crap hits the fan, when stressful situations, that's why they usually go back to where they started, aggressive or passive,
Mhm. It
because
does
you
tell
have
me.
to remain very calm to use
Mhm.
these unnatural skills. Okay, Joe,
Very well put. Yeah, no, and I would add to that, we're in the era of AI and conversations of AI are everywhere. I think what it does is assertiveness really puts you in a state of uncertainty. And the reason we like AI so much and AI is so replicable or has been created with great, I should say, impact or lives with great impact is because it predicts and overrides uncertainty. So assertiveness is really, it's in the moment. You've got to muster bravery, the brave speak work that I do. It's really the essence of what you have to do. You have to really have the courage to say something. But the problem is we don't have the predictive tools for it. You need to know the language structures, the things you're going to say, how are you going to present that information in a way that overrides the uncertainty so that you can predict the outcome. So that's all we want to do in life as humans is predict. This is why AI is so successful. It's mastered our predictive modeling, in my opinion.
Mm,
So I think this is another way to look at this very thing you're talking about.
mm. So why don't you give us your framework and let's do some myth busting around that.
Okay. Let me see. So, Mark, when you refer to framework, are you thinking about in my coursework, my thinking about assertiveness, or so I wonder if you can pinpoint a little bit on that question for me.
Well, you have my diagram, and
Oh yeah, right.
I
Got
know
it.
you're offering a workshop. Hmm?
Yeah, so what it really is, I think, is your question. What is assertiveness? Let's define it, I think, kind of thing. Your definition and my definition are very similar.
Okay.
Um, the way I see it, and I really emphasize with my students is I frame it in terms of conversational style to look at it a little differently. And that is on the spectrum, your spectrum, on one hand, you have the passive communicator. And passive is really uh, empty. There's really very few words that come out of the mouth of the passive person. But then right next to that, you have the passive aggressive person. And that is where the words do come out, but they're actually meant to say something that the person is not able to say because they haven't really learned how to do assertiveness. That is, assertiveness at its core is about being direct but polite. So this sense of passive aggressivity is often confused with being passive. In fact, it's very common, right, for people to be passive aggressive and really hurt people's feelings and
Mm,
act as if they did nothing and acting almost as if they were just passive about the topic versus aggressive behavior, which we all know is shouting, yelling, physicality. Assertiveness sits in the middle of that zone, and it's not that formulaic. Assertiveness, depends on the situation and the degree to which. But I think your example of yourself is a really good one.
mm,
I think a lot of people, to that point, misinterpret assertiveness as aggressivity. They
mhm,
see, you've got to speak up, be strong, and they
mm,
interpret the American culture. That's the way the Americans are, and that's that's not it at all. In fact,
mm,
if you look at the truly assertive people, Mark, right? They're
mm,
like you learned as a leader. They stand their ground. They make their point. They stand their ground, but they're also really good at this other thing you mentioned, this very important skill, which is curiosity. They
mhm.
listen. So that I can go into later, but that's a very important dimension that's overlooked in assertiveness because we just think, oh, I don't speak up enough, I have to speak up more. But it's not just that. There's so much more
Right.
to it. So um, I'll save explaining and unpacking passive aggressivity for later because that one's kind of hard for people to understand sometimes.
A hard one to understand. The way I always put it is, instead of fighting you up front, a passive aggressive person will try to poison you with your emotions.
Very
Like
well done.
pretend to be cooperative when they're just always picking at your words or like bringing up, diverting the conversation. You just can't make any progress with them. And I found a lot of those people are like, I've had employees that were that way, subordinates that I had to
Mhm.
work with. And many of them were just, they were jealous because here's this hot shot, this young kid getting this assignment and they have to report to him, and they're like, why wasn't I the guy? I've been here 10 years, you know?
Mhm.
And it was like
Mhm.
they were very passive aggressive people in that particular scenario.
Uh,
The other thing I was going to say is like you're reframing assertive versus aggressive. I always thought
mhm.
of that famous quote. I think
Mhm.
it came from Teddy Roosevelt to be an iron
Mhm.
fist in a velvet glove. Like you had
Right,
the firmness, but people felt the softness, right?
right, right. And it's really tricky. It's really tricky. And you said that you thought maybe a lot of people on the call weren't struggling with that aggressive interpretation of assertiveness. And I would completely disagree with you on that. I think a lot of people on this call right now actually do struggle with it because we've never really learned how to put on that glove. We don't even know where to find that glove in our wardrobe. Right, right. Because we either go quiet or when we do talk, we don't have the tools to soften it.
Mm,
So so we just come across as aggressive. And I think I'll say it's straight. I think for a lot of my Chinese clients, they're misinterpreted in the workplace because they'll come across as being very strong.
hmm.
And they're not. They're just trying to say what they feel needs to be said. But
Yeah.
the difference is, and this is where I think communication work is around it is really important. There are speaking technologies, structures you can use to give you guardrails on how to control not just what you say, but how you're feeling. I think this is under discussed, the role of emotional intelligence in all
Hmm.
of this work. I think it's at the core of everything that we
Hmm.
do in assertiveness, because you've got to understand your emotional triggers, control them, and then speak from that place. So I spend a lot of time on that with my students. You really got to know who you are when you're talking.
That's true. That's true. And I have, when I said most of you probably don't have that issue I had, it's because
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
not being aggressive out of fear, or I was being aggressive because I had a plan and I was not going to tolerate anyone delaying me. So that was a
Yeah.
very
I-
different
I'm,
origin of aggression
yeah.
compared to like,
I'm coaching a lot of people in this very topic at the
yeah,
moment, and it's really tough because you empathize because we're young in our careers or wherever,
yeah,
and we're all energy and we know how to get there and we work fast, we work hard, but we're not working alone and human beings, we're working with other human beings and we're all very sensitive and we can see what you're doing.
the common thread I would put between most people, whether they're
Mhm.
passive or they're aggressive,
Mhm.
what's keeping them down there is fear.
Mhm.
Most of the time, it's fear.
Mhm. That's
Fear they're
great.
not going to get their way, fear they're not going to be heard, or fear to speak up, right? Fear to take a chance keeps them like non-confrontational or being overly confrontational because of territorial feelings, right? But
Right.
why don't you tell us like we've covered the assertiveness versus the aggressiveness, the passive aggressiveness, as you mentioned.
Hmm.
Why does why would high performers in
Hmm.
particular
Hmm.
suffer from this lack of assertiveness?
Well, I think if again, this is an interesting cultural question to me because I think an American male power is really grounded in showing up strong, and it's very important to do
Yeah,
that. So you can come across right as strong, but you're interpreted as very aggressive. That shuts other people down, and that is not the leader you wanted to be, Mark.
that's
You want
right.
it, right? Because aggressive behavior shuts down, the other person becomes scared and they won't participate. You bring out the worst in others. And the goal of work on teams is for everyone to contribute so the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, that you invent new things. And you can't do that if you have a leader who is aggressive. Conversely, if you're too quiet, you're like a church mouse.
Hmm.
Um, we're looking for leaders who can take in the field, um, you know, um, not just summarize, but paraphrase the thoughts in the room from their own deep sense of curiosity, feed that back to everyone, and then together find solutions such
Mm.
that the leader kind of disappears into the fold, but they're assertive enough to always be in there leading that conversation. So it's this delicate balance. You never feel that an assertive person is weak ever, but you never feel that they're overly strong. So what I find is that a lot of professionals in their career struggle with this because they're way too out on the strong side.
Yeah.
Right? Right?
Well,
That's my opinion,
for
Mark.
Americans in particular,
Yes.
we are coached, like all of the business associations you join, all the articles that get written about
Mhm.
American business leaders. It's always like General George S. Patton with his silver helmet and his
Yeah.
two
Right.
pistols. You
Yeah.
got to come in there, you got to like show everyone you're in charge, you got to
Yeah.
give everyone permission to speak. It's like it's brainwashing, really. It's not effective.
Right, right. So, and then each one of us comes to assertiveness from our own personal way. We have to define it for ourselves. And it could be that some of us need to add a little bit more strength and character to our presence and our words. And there are others who need to tone it down. I like to say to my clients always is if you're out here, let's swing it back a little bit, see how it feels. You got to try it on. And it's very
Mhm.
hard for a shyer person to do this. I just did an exercise with this group in Spain, and um, the exercise was imagine you're on an airplane and the person next to you is listening to they're talking on their phone out loud. You're trying to sleep, and it's an assertiveness moment.
Yeah.
And there were, I mean, there were some, how many people in the room, 100, whatever. And there were at least 20 that I could head count that said, I would say nothing.
Yeah.
I would be too uncomfortable to say anything. And it's a great example because that's another thing. So how do you move from there to a place where it's okay to say something? It's really okay. You can argue that it's your right. I mean, one definition of assertiveness is correcting any injustice.
Hmm.
Some frame it as simple as that. The
Hmm.
correction of any injustice.
Hmm. Yeah, the expression that is common among Americans is your freedom to do anything ends when it
I hear
enters my circle, right? Like you can't go swinging your fist around and then you hit me. That's not your right to swing your fists around, right? Because you hit me, right? So you have your rights, your freedoms, as long as it's not impairing anyone else.
that's
That,
right.
that's
And you go around the world, Mark, and this is a very important point. I mean, I can talk to my French friends here, German friends,
yeah.
and they will not. We always talk about, this. We talk about the Germans, how direct they can be. I mean, I have some really great stories about that, and the French too. But in this context, they're extremely polite and careful.
Yeah.
To the context I'm talking about is when you're in my space, you're too close, they're going to opt to silence and nonverbal communication and look at you because
Mm.
it's very rude to say something. And I would argue that same for Chinese and so on, and for different reasons. So I think most of the world, Americans are very different this way because we feel we have the right. It's my right to speak up and set boundaries. This comes from our
Almost
sense of individualism and our sense of freedom, which is quite unique in human
almost a
history.
little too much sometimes.
I'm not going to judge it, but I'll tell you this, it's unique in human history. And I think it's this country that emerged out of, Greco-Roman, Hebraic cultures to this
Mm.
place we are today. It's a very young country, but
Yeah.
that's one of the results is it evolved to have this thing. And I agree, it doesn't always work to our advantage. And it makes us very aggressive at work.
Hmm.
This feeling, and you see this with women. Women had to adopt to this style. And I'm not saying women are not strong. What I'm saying is it's this typology, this way, like you were saying, of communicating strong. General Patton is a great example where we
Yeah.
have to show up no one can conquer us. And it's getting worse, I think if you look at social media, we're
I know
heading
that at Motorola, when they had sort of the inclusive training for
Hmm,
new up and coming leaders, they
mhm,
always coached women speak up in every meeting.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's sort of like overcompensating for the
Formula.
and it was not really helpful at that time. And now it's more balanced. People have assertiveness training, right? They can understand how to go about being visible and having presence without having to always demand somebody answer a question to you while you're in a meeting. It's just like you said, overly aggressive.
That's right. I like to think, I like to particularize assertiveness in everything I do. I like to particularize it, and it's assertiveness your way. I think that's
Mm.
the mistake they made, and corporate doesn't know how to do differently. It's cookie cutter. It's like we bring in one. I know this problem, taking it off the shelf. I did so much of that training,
Mm.
but yes, it has to be customized. The individual, and I feel this very strongly about Chinese. Chinese have to keep, not just the Chinese, but all of us have to keep our own sense of integrity of who we are in how we speak, not just um, cross-culturally or as an immigrant or whatever, but it's like
Mhm.
knowing yourself and that EQ kind of sense, and knowing that, okay, I just don't like talking like that. I don't, that's not what I do.
Hmm.
The thing we've got to teach though at its core is assertiveness. How
Hmm.
you do it, ah, that's the key.
You're so right. You're so right. And the other thing is people have very narrow understandings of what assertiveness is. Like you're
That's
in a
right.
meeting with a bunch of people and you're trying to convince them to do your
Mm.
proposal. And that's like their mindset. But isn't it like it's a huge range of scenarios you find yourself in that will
Sure.
each require you to be aware that you're in the situation and that you apply the
Mhm.
right approaches for that
Mhm.
particular situation, right? Do you maybe want to talk about this with me for a few minutes?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important. Everything in life is situational, contextual, and it can be my mentor at Stanford and my committee chair and everything in my life. The guy who really influenced my thinking as an anthropologist. He um he would break it down to the micro interactions
Hmm.
between humans. So much that if you really look deeply into how we interact conversationally, for example, or with body language, it's very subtle.
Hmm.
So I think you have to really be aware that when you're in a situation, let's say we're talking hypothetically some meeting, but that meeting has people in it. There's hierarchy in it. There's power distance roles. There's what you had for breakfast. That the situation is so rich and you can't predict it. So that's why
Hmm.
you've got to be brave, have
Hmm.
the tool. So I liken it to having a weapon or a quiver of arrows. You have different arrows, but or a sword, but you got to get to that meeting with a sharp sword. It's got to be ready to go, and then you got to know which move to make.
Yeah.
I think guys like Bruce Lee really understood that. No, this is not the time for that. It's time for me to back away. Well, no, yeah, yeah. There's a time just to not fight, right? And
Yeah.
but that having the tool, having sharpened it, and then knowing how to use it under what conditions is what it's all about. So you have to be able to read the room and know,
Mm.
okay, it may be Mark, and I'm very careful to say this to my students. You may not want to be asserting in that moment at all. It could
Hmm.
be really dangerous. You could be losing your job. I'm not
Yeah.
out there advocating for speaking up and anybody's rights. Not at all. Be American. Don't be like Joe. Don't be like Mark. Don't be American. Be yourself. But it starts with this, for me again, for my world, very inductively. You got to
Yeah.
pay attention to what's there. Yep, we overlook it, but you really got to learn to fit in first. This is a big part of my thinking about life because I work overseas so much. You're in Rome. How are we doing things here? Once you've got that, and you've earned the respect of people around you. I was in Switzerland and I made some faux pas. I forget what it was. I think I had my foot on a chair the wrong way. You know Switzerland.
Oh, yeah.
And this lady came over and said, we don't do that in Switzerland. I said, yeah,
You
I
probably
forgot.
had the sole of your shoe on
Yeah,
the seat.
that's right.
They
And I,
didn't
and I
like
said,
if you have your
I
leg
forgot.
crossed on there, fine. But if you put the part that steps on the ground on the seat, people are going to be offended. That's true.
And it right, and it was by accident, by the way. I was moving, and I knew this, right? I would never do. I learned my lesson years ago. But what I'm saying is that you get the lay of the land. You really got to understand where you are, and then you really, when you do speak, you speak with that groundedness. You have nothing to fear because you're in America where everybody believes they have a right to say what they say. And if you're
Hmm.
not doing that, they look at you going, "Oh, you have nothing to say. You're
Hmm.
you're 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 not contributing. Your
Hmm.
silence is anti-contribution. It's actually dead weight. Why
Hmm.
would I want you on my team anyway? Why would I want to have coffee with you?
Yeah.
All of that's missed network opportunity, missed engagement. And that's a lot of what my clients overlook. So you got to get out from behind the laptop, figure out where you are, and then
Mm.
start interacting accordingly to your advantage, the advantage you're seeking.
Let me put something forth and get your reaction
Sure.
to it. I always think of the scenarios spilling into two categories broadly.
Mhm.
One is you want to be using assertiveness to get something that you are
Yes.
pushing for or want. And the other
Right.
is somebody is trying to push you to do something that you shouldn't do or you don't want to do. And so it's like different like branches of skills or approaches that you would use for those two scenarios. Would you say two is enough, or are there?
Well, I go to a higher level first. I'd say it's all about setting boundaries. I
Hmm.
think setting boundaries really covers everything. At some point, you speak up. Injustice is probably going a little bit off in one direction, but as I said earlier, some define assertiveness as just speaking up for an injustice, but I think there's more to it than that. But it really has to do at the end of the day, the result you're looking for is to set some kind of a boundary. Um, you know, I think I deserve this, or I think we should do this, or I think it's setting that boundary around, it's circumscribing the situation in terms of results. The other one is I won't do that. I can't do that. I don't have time to do that. The no part of assertiveness, that's also setting a boundary. It's saying there's a limit here. I'm across my limit. The limit is I feel that I'm not being heard, or I really think that my idea is the best one here.
Hmm.
Um, and you're kind of putting a boundary is we often associate boundary with that side of assertiveness, which is the no category,
Right.
and it's fighting for your rights category. And I agree that that is sort of the one side of it. Um,
Yeah.
there's all that gray area of assertion, which is when you speak up and you don't hold back, you're not shy. When you're asked, what do you think? You have something to say. In
Hmm.
America, almost always. You're not afraid to give your opinion because at its core, we're talking about an American value. You are entitled, expected, you are paid to give your
Hmm.
opinion. You are paid to disagree. I would even go that far. You're paid.
So let's jump back to the next thing, which is consequences. Like I mentioned mine, right? In my journey, I had climbed very fast as an individual contributor,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
the feedback I got that the approach I was using was letting me get results, though kind of bloody as individual contributor. It was not going to take me beyond to what I was really trying to get to, right? So those are the consequences. What happens if you don't get this kind of guidance? You don't develop that awareness, you don't get the coaching, you don't develop the skills, you don't practice and stick with it and stay aware, right? Develop that awareness of what are the situations where I could have used assertiveness or when it worked and when it didn't, right? And the curiosity to keep growing, right? So
Right, right.
let's talk about some more consequences. Like I shared mine, and
Hmm.
I encourage anyone that's out there, if you have a
Yeah.
question or a situation, please feel free to type it into the chat, and we'll do our best to address it. But I know that Joe's candle is burning down. It's going to be 4 o'clock.
Mark, you're too nice, Mark. Thank you.
It's going to be 4 o'clock in the morning in about like 10
You're
minutes
right.
here, and you
About
still
10
need to get
minutes.
to sleep
Yeah.
for tomorrow's work,
Yeah.
right?
Sorry, I do have a job tomorrow, but I wanted to say thank you there, Mark, because I didn't know that you knew all of this, all these details. Mark, you're such a great host and facilitator because you're holding all this stuff and you really want to make it work for everyone. So let me say this very succinctly.
Mhm.
Invisibility. If you don't learn assertiveness, you kind of go into the state I vaguely call it, it's still kind of vague, but the notion is invisibility. You really you're not known. You don't your network can't be built the way it could be on a strong foundation of when you know who the person is, what they think, and how they are. This is very important to Americans. Americans want you to come out. Let's see who you are.
Mhm.
And it starts with making mistakes. You and I, Mark, are risk taker. We make mistakes all over the place. You and I,
Mhm.
it's incredible. Actually, people want people to know on this call, Mark and I preparing this, we made all kinds of errors. I know I did. And it's so fun to work with Mark because we don't care. It's like Fetterman says, he won 80% of his games, but he only made, 54% of his points. The reason is no, but the way he looks at it is that I hit the ball, I didn't get my point, so I just hit the next ball. Mark and I don't get stuck on the mistakes. We
Yeah.
mess up, keep going. And I think that's part of what I'm saying in coaching and learning. All this stuff, this side of assertiveness is invisibility, and you don't want that at work and career. You don't want that with your families. We don't
Mm,
want that in our relationships. We want to be present and seen, but we don't want to be known as the aggressive defender of every little thing. On the
mhm,
contrary, as I said, there's a process here. You speak
mhm,
your piece and then you listen. And
mhm.
that listening is not just listening one ear out the other. It's really engaging the person. And you might find the other thing I did not mention, Mark, which is the third way I call it, which is one might be depending on your power distance role. It's just that this is what we're going to do. I'm sorry. It asserts that way. The other one is you could come up with some new thing you never thought of because you opened up a space for that person to speak their truth. And lo and
Mm.
behold, you had some revelation because you became empathic. You said, "Oh, well, it's simple. Look, I know you can't get here at 9. Well, why don't we move it to 9:30? I'm good with that. It's not a problem. I can see
Mm.
you got stuff going on at home. So let's do it."
How about tomorrow? Can we still do it tomorrow, perhaps?
There you go. For example, compromise enters in, but it doesn't happen if you have engaged from monologue to dialogue. I mean, from
And
dialogue to monologue,
the opposite of being the
back and forth.
invisible person is to be the radioactive person, right? Like the Chernobyl. No one wants to go near that person, right?
Mm, mm.
So invisible is, oh, you work in this department? I had no idea.
That kind of
The
thing.
other,
That kind of thing.
yep. The other one is don't go in that department. There's a tornado in there.
There's a wolf in there, crazy man. Yeah, yeah. Either one. I think the other consequences, there's so much opportunity left on the table, opportunity for new work, for things like that. Because what we don't realize is that we're building our reputation through assertiveness, but we're
Mm,
not doing assertiveness for assertiveness' sake. We're not trying to be American. We're not trying to be anything like that.
mm,
We're taking what I call a cultural node. It's a node. It's one of many. Um, all cultures do assertiveness. They just do it differently. All cultures have family. They do them differently.
mhm,
All cultures do all these dimensions, these nodes of human interaction, but differently. So all we're trying to do as immigrants in America is figure out what are these nodes of interaction? How do the Americans do them? And then we're all like actors in a play. I mean, Shakespeare got that right. Whether we're in
mhm.
our own culture or another, you learn the ropes, you fit in, and then use these tools. Then you go home at night and you sleep like a bear
Yeah,
because you fit in, but you can also speak out. Because the other thing, Mark, long term, if so many of my clients don't feel like they belong after
yeah,
even after 20 years of work, and that's not healthy
not
mentally.
healthy. No, stress is a killer. You can't have that. You
Right.
know, the other thing I noticed is, or at least in my experience, is the assertive person is aiming to achieve the outcome they want, but maintain respect among all the parties. And once you get a reputation for being respectful, you will get the respect back, especially when you
Right.
have the boundary strategy that Joe had mentioned, because people learn that you show respect, and when people try to come in and ignore your needs, that you are prepared to let them know these are the boundaries. Here's how we operate. This is what I can do for you. Right? I'm happy to do it this way. There's a line of people ahead of you. Everyone's important, so you learn these kinds of things you can say that are respectful, but let them know why they can't have what they want right now,
Right.
right?
So you're making a very important cross-cultural point here, Mark. Whereas we're in a low context culture, we verbalize everything. We can say it, we can frame it, we can say it because we have the right to say it, especially in America. But especially in Chinese culture, it's very high context. You are waiting through your behavior and your silence,
Yeah.
the other person to understand you in that harmonious context, in a context where social harmony is primordial, it's essential to smooth interaction. And in Chinese culture, it's quite unique because of Confucian history, in my opinion. And but it's all over the world. It's the sense
Yeah.
that you people understand what they're supposed to do without having to be told. So your body language will communicate the meaning. So, for example, I remember asking someone, not recent, just recently in Palo Alto, and
Mhm.
we were talking about something about her family situation. It came up because she's very stressed. I work with her, and I said, "So how's that going?" And you know what she did?
Mhm.
She said, "Oh, I think that building is new." And I'm thinking, was that an answer? What was that a distraction? Was that... And what it was a signal to me. Drop it, Joe. I don't want to talk about it.
Mm.
So I it's not that I tested it, but I honestly I wasn't sure. So I kind of brought it up in a different angle. Oh, so everything's okay. It's a very American way to have dealt with that.
Mm.
And then she said again, I really do think it's new. And this is what culture is always doing. It has its way of doing setting boundaries. It has its ways of being assertive. And until you really go inside culture or having been there or cross those boundaries yourself, this is what I recommend all immigrants to do is sometimes get out of the WeChat bubble and
Hmm.
get into the people at work, and you start to see how they really do these different nodes of communication. It's very important.
The earlier example, not the lady with the building fetish, but you were talking about, the speaking up part. And I remember this one client who was a brilliant engineer, semiconductor chipset engineer. And his frustration when he came to me is, he was saying, how come, I have a hard time getting recognized in the reviews? How come this and that? And how come, they never ask me my opinion in the meeting? And I'm the expert. I have a Tsinghua PhD. I'm an expert in gallium arsenide technology. And here they're all talking about it. And sometimes they'll ask me a question, and it's such an obvious answer for everyone in the room. It's like, well, you have to assert yourself. You have to speak up when you
Right.
see that's not going the way you would do it. You have to develop that expertise in their mind. And you can't do that if you're never speaking up and taking that chance, right? So,
Really good point, Mark. I think this is we forget that human communication is interactive. So their discomfort, your discomfort is their discomfort.
yes.
If you're communicating unease, they're going to feel uneasy. Human beings, we want the other person to be relaxed because we want to know them. We want to lower all affective filter. When our cognitive load is based on stress, or our gut is on fire, then we're not commuting the real us. Or worse, if it's gone silent, there's nothing for them to interpret. So they're not going to talk to you. It's very
Mm.
common what you're talking about, and it can be that's all fixable. That's the good news. It's all learnable.
Yeah, so we're going to be ending it here in a minute. People, I'm
Yeah, any
surprised we
question?
haven't had any question. Maybe questions on assertiveness are either too personal or maybe
Could
too
be.
complicated to write down in the
I
chat.
think they
Maybe
are. I think they
contact
are.
I have to put in there. But I'm going to leave it like this. First of all, make sure you scan that QR code because when we get off the phone, you won't be able to do it anymore. So you might as well at least open the web page and you can bookmark it or save it for later or read it right after this call. And Joe, I want to thank you for agreeing to do this at 3 a.m. over there in France. And
Yeah.
why don't you give us some closing words of wisdom?
Yeah, a couple closing words of wisdom. Some of the biggest challenges that I get from my clients are these things. Managing up, having the courage when senior leadership is in the room, just even talking. They go to formulate their ideas, it gets jumbled. Has nothing to do with English. Has, you're welcome, you young. Has nothing to do with English. Has nothing to do with anything. It's like that. It has to do with the cognitive load in your brain. You're panicked. That's part of that mindset piece, that letting go of it. Things like saying no. Very hard for my Chinese clients to say no because in China you can say no without having to say no. We understand. We know when no's there. Can you come to my dinner Friday night? 可能. I used to get that from my students all the time. Oh, 你来我家吗？我做饭。你来吗？可能. Well, maybe I'll be there. Well, what does maybe mean? I don't know in China sometimes, right? Negotiation is a big deal, but especially this kind of conflict, everything having to do with conflict. What is conflict? It's another node. You do conflict in China, very different from conflict here in America. Very different. In fact, what's conflict to us is what's conflict to a Chinese is not at all conflict to us. It's just disagreement. So these are very difficult issues. They're delicate. It requires each person to look at these from their own emotional intelligence perspective, come up with their own assertiveness style. That's my goal for every person I work with.
Yeah, I've even seen some difficulties. Who gets to pay the bill, right?
Oh, all the time. That well,
Yeah.
that one among Chinese is taken care of. It's the fight, it's the drama, but someone will always win, and it's someone who knows how to win, and you know how to give in. It's a very fun thing to watch in Asia.
Mm.
Americans, it's also very different. But although those customs are changing, but what's more important to me is the mindset of when you take care of someone, you take care of them lavishly. You don't just do a halfway job on taking care of someone. It's a big job. These are all
It
things to learn.
is.
And
Yes.
it's also, so conversely for the Chinese coming to America, it's really important to discuss these things and say, oh, so that's why you guys do that. All these aha moments are very important. And again, I'm very careful with culture as a word, capital C, because that's a normal distribution. We're filled with outliers. You can't just put somebody in a distribution. I know Americans that are more Chinese than Americans, and vice versa. So those terms are very slippery, but I
Mhm.
think each person knows and they can give their own evidence.
Perfect. And with that, we'll shut it down so you can put
Yeah,
on your
yeah,
pajamas and get some sleep, all right?
I will. Mark, thank you very much for having me, and it's always a pleasure. Great being here.
Okay. À demain.
À demain. À demain. Au revoir. Salut.
Au revoir. Salut. Goodbye, everyone.
In a world so connected, it's hard to stand out. But I've got a secret that I'm about to shout. Building bridges and making friends, that's how the journey of success begins. Surround yourself with diverse minds, experts in their field, so wise. Together we'll conquer and achieve. Customize your growth, there's nothing you can't conceive. Build your network, reach for the stars. Professional adventures taking you far. Communication and leadership, it's all in your hands. Unlock your potential with your dream team stand. Surround yourself with diverse minds, experts in their field, so wise.